From amidst the bloody loam of war it grew, a seed of power beyond belief. By magic it had been purified. By the lives of beloved ones it had been saved. By the hand of a champion it had been sown. And now, in the darkest hour, that seed became a goddess. Alarielle was reborn, and her children rejoiced. No bitter and waning thing was she, but a goddess of war, full-formed and at the height of her powers. With her coming, the spirit song swelled. Harmonies rose and twined like the branches of some mighty tree. It was a song of vengeance, a song of rebirth, a song of rage. It was a song of war, and from its spiraling chorus, the Sylvaneth drew strength.
For the next several days, we're going to be diving into the Sylvaneth, the living might and fury of the realms, railing against chaos, corruption, and impurity. The Sylvaneth are first and foremost the children of Alarielle, goddess of life, and we covered her story in another video. She is the sole creator and deity of the Sylvaneth, and it is their defining feature for their narrative. Very important to start off with. But as far as the faction goes apart from Alarielle, the Sylvaneth are a tree-like keepers of guardians and custodians of the realms. They seek to spread life in abundance across the lands. They're somewhat of a combination between gardeners, druids, and bees, as we would know them in our real world, where bees tend to facilitate growth by cross-pollination. They bring life wherever they go. They encourage it, they nurture it, they foster it, and defend it. And because of their efforts, the realms are packed with forests and clean water. They represent the realm's desire to live and thrive, to be full of life. Not just life magic like from Guran, but just living things, to be active wherever they are. Now the Sylvaneth are also interesting in the fact that they are themed after life cycles, the natural cycle of life. Just as nature has a rhythm of birth, life, age, and death, so also do the Sylvaneth. They are quote-unquote born as a soul pod, which can take a lot of different forms. It could be something like a literal seed, it could be a cloud of smaller organisms, whatever it is. They live their lives serving the forest and the gardens of the realms, and they age into leadership, and eventually they die, but when they die they return back to the earth that made them. It's like this beautiful cycle. It's a peaceful existence of birth, life, death, recycling, and that's just how you carry on living, is by fostering life in other ways. Has almost a reincarnation aspect to it, but really it's meant to solidify the ideas of cycles and seasons and nature being first and foremost on their minds. Now another concept that's very important to understanding Sylvaneth as we go into this week is the idea of the song. There is music in the air in the mortal realms. Now it's imperceptible to most, but not the Sylvaneth. It's the hum of life and the song of things that are living. With every new forest or garden, the song grows and evolves. The music on the wind is heard by all Sylvaneth. Their connection to the magic of life is so strong that they can hear it. When a wargrove needs help, they let out a song of war, and nearby wargroves, which is the organizational structure of Sylvaneth, will come to their aid. To give it like a modern, what we would know in the real world comparison, it's almost like whale noises. It's this beautiful hum underneath the water, but it's actually also a means of communication. It can be heard for miles, and even though it sounds very relaxing and very soothing, they are trying to communicate with one another. And this also is really important because it's one of the very few means of communication across realms. We pointed this out when we talked about Archeon, how he has the Gaunt Summoners of Tzeentch bound to his will because they can communicate using magic realm to realm, and he has this kind of great communication network, which really does help a war effort. This is the same thing. This song echoes through all the realms. Every Sylvaneth can hear the song of Alarielle. They can be led with a singular focus. One mission, one song, many listeners. But rather than just talking about them, let's talk about their origins. After awakening in Guran, Alarielle sows the first soul pods in the garden. This is way back in the very beginning of the Age of Myth. Sows the first gardens that are going to bring forth Sylvaneth. Now, some of those gardens she planted would grow into the wargroves that we still now know today, so they have a colossally long lineage. And with that, the Sylvaneth began growing forests and gardens across the realms. Dryads and branch wraiths became garden tenders. The noble spirits like tree lords and branch witches became guardians. They fought off any tribes or factions seeking to destroy the forests and glades. And we don't know how long the Age of Myth was, but it had to have been a very long time for the Sylvaneth to establish themselves around pretty much every realm. And frankly, when we meet the storyline in the Age of Chaos, when Chaos is kind of kicking into the fight, there's just life everywhere, and so it had to have been a good amount of time. And at this point, things are generally good. There's some friction with other factions, like deforestation for resources, kinds of things, but for the most part, everyone's kind of getting along. And then comes the Age of Chaos. A rent in Ghyran is torn, and the forces of chaos pour into the realm. Nurgle, above all, has his eye on Ghyran, because he saw so much living things that he could corrupt, to break down into more life. And with that, the War of Life had begun. And for endless seasons, the Wargroves flocked to Ghyran to try and push back Nurgle. And this was a horrific war that lasted ages, and it's this war between putrefaction and healing, corruption and regrowth. Forces poured in on both sides to meet in Ghyran. The problem is that when Nurgle fights, he doesn't just send troops into an area, kind of his essence pours into wherever he is. So not only are they fighting on these battlegrounds with Chaos Warriors who are dedicated to Nurgle, but the ground itself in Ghyran is becoming corrupted, and bit by bit, the forces of Order, what we now know as Order, the Sylvaneth, are being pushed back. And this whole time, Alarielle is pulling all the Wargrove she can back from the various realms into Ghyran to stop this, right? Ghyran is like the home base of all Sylvaneth and life magic. It takes priority. But over the centuries, the war just wasn't going Alarielle's way. Nurgle forces were reinforced faster than the Sylvaneth could reinforce themselves. Corruption happened faster than the cleansing power that Alarielle could bring. In addition to that, non-Sylvaneth residents of Ghyran, remember this whole thing's happening, and there's still human tribes there, and Duard and all these things. They start seeking the mercy of Nurgle and turn against Alarielle. They see the war is not going great, so they join Chaos, and that's why the mortal forces fight for him. And all these things led to an increasing sense of defeat and despondency in Alarielle. Her song changed from that of war, of drawing all the Sylvaneth in to fight, to sort of a dirge of sorrow. With that, the Sylvaneth retreated. They hid in magic vales and unknown forests, places that were very hard to find unless you wanted to be found. Alarielle herself retreated to Athelweird, sort of like a little pocket realm where we find her later, to contemplate her loss. And for the most part, Nurgle takes over the vast majority of Ghyran. That it is really stated very clearly that he has almost the entire realm to himself. And it stays in this state for hundreds of years, and this is where we meet them all in the Realmgate War series in Age of Sigmar. The Sylvaneth are at this point a shattered race, spread out among the realms. The Song of Sorrow still permeates them, it's still the tune that's being played. And we covered their introduction and rescue of Alarielle in the Realmgate War videos. I will link to those down below. But to give you a quick rehash, Stormcast Eternals land in Ghyran, open some realm gates, and they find some Sylvaneth. Combined, they try to find Alarielle, accidentally leading a giant Nurgle army to her as well. Alarielle escapes, but has spent so much energy that she goes back to being a soul pod. Remember this whole cycle of life, death, and rebirth type thing. She goes back to being a soul pod, where the Sylvaneth and Stormcast Eternals work together to get her at a good place where they can bury her for her to be reborn. You don't want to put her in ground where it's been corrupted by chaos. That'll just totally ruin her. So you have to put her in a place that's untainted by chaos, uncorrupted. And there's some more details in that story I won't go over here. Go listen to the Realmgate War series. But after being planted and given time to re-energize, she reawakens in her war aspect. Where she was dark and morose like winter, now she is fiery and angry, full of rage and energy. More like summer. Aspects are kind of like seasons for her. And at that point, she sings a new song, the Song of War. And the Sylvaneth become a main player in the Realmgate Wars. Again, this is the most deeply abbreviated version ever. Go watch the Realmgate War series if you'd like to know more. So where is the faction now? Because that'll happen in the Realmgate War series. Now we're in sort of this Soul War Malign Portents section, which happens a great deal of time afterwards, at least 100 years, probably more. Well, we're going to fast forward to now and take a look. The Allgate, which allowed Chaos forces to easily move into Ghyran, is now closed and secured by the forces of Order. Nurgle is being slowly, very slowly, purified away. The Wargroves that were hidden are now out and fighting. Alarielle has rejoined the Pantheon of Gods, so she's fighting with Sigmar, and she's actively leading her armies again. With that, life is slowly returning to the realms. They are warriors again, but also still caretakers of the realms. They fight for order, but they do still have some friction with other order factions. For example, what is the vast majority of cities built from? The answer that we know so far is wood. Wood is an important resource in this kind of fantasy universe. Well, where does wood come from? And with that, we're introduced to the idea of expansion as a double-edged sword. The Sylvaneth are now safe to begin regrowing in the realms. That safety is paid for in real estate and resources that they are caretakers of. And it's an uneasy tension, so they'll often clash with order forces on small scales over this. Right? They are safe enough to regrow these beautiful, wonderful forests and be caretakers of the realms again, only because these cities and bastions and defenders are there, and the defenders in return need the resources that the Sylvaneth are now free to grow. But the main thing here is that they hate chaos more than they hate someone cutting down their tree, right? They hate chaos more than lumberjacks. So they're okay to be on the board with Sigmar's plans and kind of work with everybody else, like meet them halfway. And this is all complicated by their nature. They're not human. They don't have human values. They live much longer than us, and they don't fear death like we do. It's this harmonious, peaceful cycle. They don't consume like we do. They don't have a pantheon of gods like we do in these stories. They have Alarielle, and only Alarielle. She made them more than Sigmar made the Stormcast Eternals. More direct input. So they really operate in this very cool space narratively, where they're close enough to humans to understand. Like, we get what they're trying to do and what they value on a certain level. On the other hand, they're kind of how we picture like Seraphon, where it's like you're very alien in the sense that you have very different motivations and the way you perceive the world, and how does that fit into order. As I said, this puts them at a very interesting spot in the lore. So friends, this is the introduction and primer to the Sylvaneth, just to kind of give you a few kind of building blocks so that when we dive into them the rest of this week and beyond, we have some kind of foundational ideas that we can lean back on. The idea of nature and cycles and harmony with the environment and the realms wanting to thrive. Being caretakers and guardians and stewards, these are all extremely important concepts when you're talking about this faction. It also ideologically makes them very different from anything we've seen before. They are so interconnected to the nature of the realms, more so than any other faction. Other armies are really great at using resources. The Fyreslayers are really great at metallurgy and craftsmanship and that kind of thing. The Keratin Overlords are great at understanding the science behind how these worlds function. The Edenith Deepkin use the oceans and the waters for security reasons and to make their lives possible, but I don't see the rest of these factions going out of their way to serve the realms. They're good at using them, but no one serves them like the Sylvaneth serve the mortal realms. A selfless wanting them to thrive for the sake of more life. I love this. It's kind of a beautiful nobility in terms of being a caretaker and loving creation and the environment that you're in. At the same time, it puts them in a really cool place where you can get really ugly and really mean when that environment is threatened. And we'll learn more about that later this week. With that, I want to announce here that I'm mixing up the way I do lore weeks. Rather than limiting myself to 5 days and just kind of cranking out content, all the lore videos for the next week, maybe week and a half, are going to focus on the Sylvaneth. But you will see some other things as well while you're reforging, tactical videos, things like that. This is all in an effort to make sure I can keep doing as much as I possibly can without limiting myself to a 5-day stretch. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you leave me some feedback for it. And I'll see you next time as we learn more about Alarielle and the Sylvaneth. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey Wargamers, thank you so much for watching that video. Be sure to hit subscribe and click the little bell notification icon so you're alerted to all new videos coming out.